Hi everybody, I'm here today with the amazing Polly Harlow, a senior project officer at Clear Global. Polly and I are at the Humanitarian Networks and Partnership Week in Geneva and learning a lot and talking to a lot of really interesting people. And Polly has some really interesting reflections. Hi Polly.
Hi Amy.
What do you think is interesting?
So I'm here talking about collecting voice data for voice technologies, and specifically for uses in humanitarian and emergency contexts.
Right, of course.
And so I'm obviously here in a room surrounded by humanitarians, which is not the usual situation for me. I'm very much more these days spending my time with folks in the tech world, our technology partners. And what I think's really interesting here is that I might...
Just in terms of technology partners, give us an example of what you're talking about. You're talking about the Microsofts and Googles of the world, or are you talking about...
Not so much the Microsofts and Googles. I'm talking about some of our university partners in Africa building really cool language tech in low resource languages. I'm talking about smaller organizations that are doing this work with communities. But what I think is really interesting here is I might not be in a room with people who are building language tech. But I'm in a room with humanitarians who've been talking for a long time around questions of data protection in vulnerable contexts, ownership, what that means, accountability, measuring impact,
we do.
All of these types of things. And you know, as we at Clear Global are working on collecting voice data, including with vulnerable communities and low resource language speakers, I think it's really interesting to be asked those questions first and foremost in this environment, which are really important questions as well when we're doing this that we need to think about. Right,
and you were also talking about the focus not only on protection and protecting people and making sure that we do no harm, but also on thinking about what the impact of the work is.
Exactly, and not just the impact of, we collect voice data, what happens with it, but, what happens with the tools that are then built, that are using it, and are we collecting data in a way that is actually meaningfully reflects the communities that those tools are ultimately intended to serve. Right,
and why do you think that's interesting?
I think it's interesting because if you look at the many languages that are currently underserved by voice technologies, and especially languages with many millions of speakers. Lots of those languages are languages spoken by communities affected by crises, emergencies, and linguistically that presents something quite interesting. Among internally displaced populations, languages really change. And if we want those languages to be in the digital world, we need to collect data with communities that are faced by crisis and in these contexts. So I think it's really interesting to think about, how do we do this in a way that is safe? When is it responsible to choose not to? When is it responsible to choose not to? When do communities not want to do that as well? And to really kind of have to grapple with all of those difficult questions, but ultimately do it in a way that communities are not left behind by tools that are increasingly every day for someone like myself who's an English speaker. So
among other languages,
among a number of languages,
Thank you, Polly. That was super interesting, really insightful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me.
And that's what's interesting.